computer at home, so I'm zooming in from the my phone. For Zoom, you can all hear me. Okay, let's begin. Okay, we're in the middle of the Gemara on Daf Samach Beis and Aleph 62a. Perfect. Okay, so let's take a few minutes and rewind so we can get ourselves up to speed. The Mishnah said Kusim do not have Naziris. What's a Kusi? A guy, non-Jew. However, an Eved, a slave, and a woman do have Naziris. What's the source? A woman, man or woman, is specifically written in the Torah. Ish Isha who want to become a Nazir, that we know. Eved, because besides for talking to man and woman, or it doesn't really make a difference who we're talking to, because man and woman are clearly included. But somebody else is included because it says Amarta Alem. You're talking to somebody else. Who's the adjacent to man and woman? It's a slave. Okay. How do we know non-Jews are not included? So it would seem because God says to Moshe to talk to the Bnei Israel, the children of Israel. Presumably that means children of Israel are included. Everybody else is not included. However, the Gemara said that's a little more complicated than that. Why is that? Because we find by Erechin a similar idea. And in Erechin, we do not limit non-Jews, or we do, but only partially. What does that mean? So by Erechin, it says, God told Moshe, go speak to the Jews, tell them about Erechin. Now we said in Erechin, there's two parts. There is the sponsor, right? And then there's the subject. So, and it could be the same person. A person can sponsor his own Erechin, in which case he's both the sponsor and the subject. Or potentially a person can sponsor somebody else's Erechin. So we said that the sponsor of the Erechin has to be a Jew. The subject, though, could be Jewish or non-Jewish. And why is this? Because it says Dabra b'nei Yisrael v'amart aleim ish, and ish means humankind, as opposed to achiv or amitai, which refer to a Jew. Ish refers to even a non-Jew. A non-Jew could be the subject of Erechin, just like a Jew. And therefore, the Gemara posits that we should include non-Jews in the category of Nazir, because even though it says speak to the Jewish people, it does say ish Isha, man or woman, and that should include non-Jews. So according to the Gemara's first attempt, the reason why non-Jews are not included is because you need to have a father and mother. What does it mean you need to have a father and mother? Two versions. The first version was your father and mother need to be tameh with a severe level of tumah associated with a Jew. And a non-Jew does not have the same strict level of tumah as a Jew. Okay, in other words, according to that version, the halacha, the law of Nazir that requires you to refrain from becoming tameh to your father and mother, is not just a matter of practical law, but it also now becomes a defining feature of what it means to be a Nazir, that you have a father and mother who are a strict level of tumah. The other version is that a father and mother means you have to have a father and mother, and a non-Jew doesn't have a father and mother. What does it mean doesn't have a father and mother? He doesn't inherit his father and mother. He does inherit his father. What it means is that there is a certain level where a non-Jew's inheritance is not as intense as a Jew's inheritance with regard to inheriting slaves. A Jew inherits his father's slaves, a non-Jew does not. So therefore he's not considered a father, and because you can't become tameh to your father, we're saying that you need to have a father. And a non-Jew at some level doesn't have a father to the same level that a Jew has a father. Okay. That was the beginning of yesterday's discussion. Then we move on to another alternative, which is the question of Erechin. So we're saying, who is it? It's Rava posits as follows. Rava says there's no comparison between Erechin and Nazir. What does Erechin tell me? Erechin says we have Dabra b'nei Yisrael, speak to the Jewish people. Jewish people have a huge amount of Erechin. Okay, v'amart aleim ish, say to the man or woman if you want to give an Erechin. That means that non-Jews are included for a small category. What's the big category? What's the small category? So the Gemara explains that the big category means that a Jew could be the subject and the donor of an Erechin. whereas a non-Jew can only be the subject but not be a donor. Okay, so now let's say that Nazir is analogous to Erechin. You'd have to come up with some similar idea where a Jew has a big category of Nazir and a non-Jew has a small category. The Gemara gave, I think, 3 or 4 proposals of what the difference between the categories is. The first proposal was a carbon. Maybe a Jew brings a carbon, a non-Jew doesn't bring a carbon. That doesn't make any sense because a non-Jew anyway can't bring a carbon. Because a non-Jew can only bring a carbon ayla and only a voluntary one, not an obligatory one. Okay, maybe the difference is because he can make his son into a Nazir. No, that doesn't either work because the source that a Jew can make his son into a Nazir is a halach l'maisha mesine. It wouldn't make sense that we need a pasuk, or the written law, to guide me to that a non-Jew is included for something in the oral tradition. The next option, third option, was a permanent Nazirus. That maybe a Jew could be a permanent Nazir, a non-Jew cannot become a permanent Nazir. So in other words, a Jew has a wide category. He's a Nazir and he's a permanent. We said there's 3 types of permanent Nazirus, right? There's a Nazir of Shimshon. There's the Nazirus that's equivalent to the Nazirus that Avshalom accepted. And then there's a regular Nazirus that lasts forever. That would be, so we call those Nazir Shimshon, a Nazir La'olam, or Nazir Olam. A Nazir Olam is the Nazir of Avshalom. He's allowed to cut his hair. Nazir Shimshon is allowed to become Tamei. But a Nazir Olam is a standard Nazirus that lasts forever. And he does not have the leniencies of either Avshalom or Shimshon. Okay, so maybe a Jew has Nazir and all these 3 variants of Nazir Olam, and a non-Jew doesn't. The Gemara says that there's no hint in the verse at a Nazir Olam. There's no reason to presume the verse is talking about a permanent Nazirus, and therefore it's not logical to presume that that would be the difference between a Jew and a non-Jew. By Erechin, we talk about both. We talk about the sponsor, and we talk about the subject. So it makes sense that that would be the differentiating factor of a Jew versus a non-Jew. But by Nazir, the verse doesn't mention anything about a permanent Nazirus, since it doesn't stand to reason that would be a difference. And the fourth possibility the Gemara ultimately rejects would be that there's a unique law that a Jew is allowed to use his father's sacrifices. If him and his father are Nazirim at the same time, his father dies, he's allowed to use his father's sacrifices. We saw the limitations of the laws previously. Now, maybe a Jew has that, a non-Jew doesn't have that. This is just one problem, which is that concept is an oral tradition. It's halach l'maisha mesine. And therefore, it doesn't stand to reason that would be the differentiating factor the verse would indicate. Henceforth, we have not been able to find a difference between a Jew and a non-Jew in any way that we can say a Jew has an expansive category of Nazirus and a non-Jew a less expansive category. And therefore, it does make sense to conclude that Bnei Yisrael excludes non-Jews. Together, it's a 10-minute summary of yesterday.
Really good.
Okay.
I like the word exclude.
Okay, and now we continue to go on. This is partially tangential. So by Eric and by Nazir, we talk about ish ki yafli. The word yafli means hafla. Hafla means wonder, but it also means to speak out, to create, so to speak, to make a prohibition. Okay, so we have an ish, man, right? Ish means even non-Jews. Kiyafli, who will speak, will create a hafla. So the Gemara asks, ish kiyafli, neder be'arkecha. When we talk about Erechin, it says ish kiyafli, lamali. Why do we need in other words, in what sense is the ish, meaning even including non-Jews, in what sense is he included in the category of kiyafli, of creating Erechin? Because we're saying now that a non-Jew actually can't even make an Erechin. He can only be the subject of an Erechin. So why is he included why is ish, the word man, including non-Jew, included when we talk about creating the Erechin, Yafli? Michli, let's examine this. Ha-iskish Erechin l'nedarim. Erechin is compared to nedarim. The Amar Krot, ish ki Yafli neder be'arkecha. We call Erechin a type of neder. So sort of we're equating nedarim to Erechin. And we learn with regard to nedarim, ish, ma tamid loimer ish. What does the word ish mean, man? It means it means to include non-Jews. That they can bring sacrifices. We said specifically the sacrifice of Ayla, just like a Jew. Okay, So therefore, ishkiyafli be'erachin lamali. So why do we need? What does the statement of a man, meaning a non-Jew, will create an erachin? What exactly does that mean if you can't create an erachin anyway? So Gemara says, it's 1 second. Right. So we learned in Masechtas Nedarim that a 12-year-old is able to make an eder. Why is this? Because he calls mufla hasamach leish, sort of the period of cognizant speech where he understands what he's saying, which is close to adulthood. So just like a Jew can make an eder in that category, a non-Jew could also. Okay. Now,
sorry, page position, please.
62a.
62a.
About 10 lines down. Liman da Omar, the first one. There's two of them, one on top of another.
Okay.
Okay, there's just one problem. Because Hanicha Liman da Omar, this would make sense according to the opinion. Mufla samach leish, the araisa. That, let's say, the 12-year-old making an eder, or in the case of a girl, it would be an 11-year-old making an eder, that is a biblically binding neder. Even though she's underage, she's a minor in the legal sense, the neder is still valid. That makes sense if it's valid biblically. However, if you're going to say that it's rabbinical, then presumably if it's rabbinical, then that means that the understanding of the word ishkiyafli doesn't include the period that's next to adulthood, the period of where you're legally a minor that's the closest to adulthood. So therefore, presumably wouldn't be included in the verse. So Gemara says, no, this makes sense. We're including that the period of adult, that a non-Jew sort of is more severe than a Jew. So a 12-year-old Jewish kid cannot make an eder biblically. It's a rabbinical concept. Whereas if you're a non-Jewish kid, you could make a neder rabbin. You couldn't make a neder even if you're underage. This is sort of difficult to understand. Taisus deals with it. Taisus tries to explain why this would be logical. Taisus explains the reason is because a Jew has a prohibition not to violate his commitments. So there's two reasons not to violate commitments. Number one, it's not a good idea and it damages your reputation. And second of all, because it's prohibited. A non-Jew does not have the prohibition. And therefore, it makes sense to say that a Jewish child that has a prohibition of lo yachal varoi, of violating his neder, he has to wait till adulthood to make a neder. Whereas a non-Jewish child, non-Jewish minor who's close to adulthood, doesn't have that prohibition. He is able to make a neder close to adulthood, and it's a binding neder. Okay. 1 second. Okay. Now, hold on. So we're talking about erachin. We're talking about a non-Jewish child is included in the words of ishkiyaf of erachin. In other words, included in the ability to make an erach. Now, the Gemara previously just said that he cannot make an erach. He can only be the subject of an erach. So now, like we pointed out yesterday in the beginning, we pointed out that there was a debate. So we said a Jew has big erachin, non-Jew has small erachin. What's the big? What's the small? So yesterday we explained that a Jew's erachin means he could be both the sponsor and the subject. And a non-Jew's erachin is just to be the subject. And now the Gemara is bringing that this is actually a subject of debate. There's another opinion that says the opposite. The other opinion says that both a Jew and a non-Jew could both sponsor an erachin, but only a Jew could be the subject of an erachin. Okay, so the Gemara says, that a Jew can be the subject of an erachin, but a non-Jew cannot be the subject of an erachin. I would think that a non-Jew can't be the sponsor. Talmud loimer ish, that a non-Jew could be the sponsor. So therefore, then it makes sense, meaning a non-Jew could sponsor erachin. Not only could a non-Jew sponsor erachin, but also mufla hasamach leish, meaning a non-Jewish minor who's close to adulthood can also commit to sponsor an erachin. Who's erachin? Obviously, the erachin of a Jew. The subject of the erachin is a Jew. That makes sense. However, according to the opinion that we explained previously, the way we went yesterday, that a Jew could be the sponsor. A non-Jew cannot be the sponsor. I would think they can't be the subject. Talmud Leimer Ish. Therefore, the Torah says Ish. A non-Jew could be the subject of an erechim, but cannot be the sponsor. So then I feel Tinik Bar Chodesh Bar Ruchihu. Kiyafli Lomali. In other words, then anyone could be, any child, any person can have erechim, even an infant, right? There's an erechim for anyone who's over the age of 30 days old, not just for people that are close to adulthood. As a matter of fact, there's a different erech between adults and children, between minors and adults. And therefore, in what sense is a non-Jew included in erechim from Ish Kiyafli? Yafli means he's gonna make a hafla, he's gonna speak something meaningful, but he can't make an erechim. So why is he included in the context of speaking? He can't actually make an erechim. We're talking about an adult here. One second. Okay, so in other words, the truth of the matter is that a non-Jew cannot have erechim. He cannot sponsor an erechim. It doesn't make a difference what his age is. So the pasuk here is coming to tell me a concept of nidorim. A non-Jew could make a neder. Who can make a neder? Only a non-Jew that understands what he's saying. But if he doesn't understand what he's saying, he's not able to make a neder. One second. Okay, so therefore, even though since he's unable to speak out the words, he doesn't understand what he's saying. Just double check that. 1 second. Yeah. This is clearly sort of he has to understand what a neder is. So we're talking about an adult who doesn't understand what a neder is. He doesn't understand the concept of that type of commitment, and therefore his nedarim are not valid. Now, by a Jew, we're not talking about somebody here who's sort of crazy or psychotically deranged. We're talking about somebody here who is in tune with life. He's at least manageable, but he doesn't understand what a neder is. If a Jewish person makes a neder under such circumstances, the neder is valid. If a non-Jewish person makes a neder in such circumstances, the neder is not valid. Together?
One more time, Rabbi. Last sentence, please.
The idea of ish, the word ish includes non-Jews, man, meaning humankind. That includes non-Jews with regard to speaking a erechim.
Okay.
As we understood, a non-Jew cannot speak an erechim because according to the opinion we've been going with, he can't be a sponsor. So actually this verse is talking about nedarim in general. And there's a difference here between Jews and non-Jews. A Jewish normal, regular normal person who's in touch with reality, who makes a neder, even if he does not completely understand what the neder is valid. However, a non-Jew under similar circumstances, the neder is not valid.
I see. All right.
Okay. So now we understand why the Torah says ish kiyafli with regard to erechim. Now, of course, we move on. Ela ish kiyafli the kasam rachmana gabi nizir islamali. With regard to the fact, 1 second. Yeah. With regard to the fact that it says Isha will make a hafla, he'll speak out Naziris, that the Torah writes by Naziris Lamali. Why is it necessary? Let's examine this. Naziris Lanadarim. Naziris is a type of neder. They're compared to each other. Kiyafli Lamali. What exactly does, in other words, in what way, what else is included in Naziris? Naziris is the same as Nadarim. So it has all the same conditions of what is necessary to make a Naziris. So what is included, in other words, what else is necessary by Naziris that isn't necessary by other Nadarim? What's different about Naziris that the Torah has to repeat itself and say Ish Kiyafli? So Gemara says the first attempt is, we're going to go here with Taisa's explanation, which is, one can understand why someone prefer the opposite of Taisa's explanation. Okay, it's coming to include an unclear Naziris, meaning if a guy makes What are Yadayim? Yadayim are handles, right? We said a classical example of Yadayim is we're a Nazir. Guy's wearing a big costume for Purim. It says, I am a Nazir. And he's walking in front of you, and a guy says, I like him. So presumably he means like him, he should be a Nazir. If the Nazir is over Lefanov, that means that's considered Yadayim Mechichas. The handle of like him is clearly defined. However, if there's not too many people standing around and he says like him, it's not so clear that he's referring to the Nazir. Even if he says he intended the Nazir, there's no haflaw there. He didn't speak out Nazirus. Therefore, the Nazirus is not valid. And how do we know? Even though in other words, Nidor and Yadayim Mechichas might work, but by Nazirus it doesn't work. So Gemara says, okay, according to Tais, we have to make a minor change in the Gersa here. The Itmar we learned Yadayim she'en mechichas, Yadayim that are not clear. Abaya Amar, according to Tais' version, it's loy having Yadayim. One second. I'm sorry. Hold on a second. Sorry. Abaya Amar having Yadayim, they are valid. Rava Amar loy having Yadayim, they're not valid. Hold on. Yeah. Okay. So according, 1 second. Yeah. So according to Abaya, this makes sense. In other words, because by standard in the Durham, we allow Yadayim she'en mechichas. It's only by Nazir that we require the statement to be clear and well easily understood. Whereas according to Rava, both Nidarim and Nazir are in the same category. You need to have a clearly understandable statement. So therefore, according to Rava, what's unique about Nazirus? El Rava Mike Lamemer. Okay, so the Gemara tries another attempt. The idea of Kiyafli is to tell you the idea of Reb Tarfon. What Reb Tarfon said? What happened? This is the case in the Mishnah. There were 6 people, right? One guy is walking toward them. And the first guy says, I should be a Nazir if this is Reuven. The next guy says, I should be a Nazir if it's not Reuven. And the third guy says, I should be a Nazir if any of you are Nazirus. Nazirim. And the fourth guy says, I should be a Nazir if none of you are Nazirim. And the fifth guy says, I'm out of here. don't remember exactly what the fifth guy said. Okay, it's at least 4. Regardless, Reb Tarfon says that none of them are Nazirim. Why are none of them Nazirim? Because in order to make a Nazirus, you have to have haflaw. You have to give a clear statement. How does Reb Tarfon know this? He knows this from Ish Kiyafli. That by Nazir we require a clear statement, not a statement on condition.
Pick your case up.
Okay, so the Gemara continues.
I need your phone anyway.
Okay, so this makes sense according to the opinion of Reb Tarfon. El Rabban Mike Lamemer, according to the rabbis that disagree with Reb Tarfon, what does Kiyafli of Nazir tell me? We need it as a source for the following brisa. This concept that a rabbi can nullify a neder, it's not exactly clear what the source is. When a rabbi pronounces a neder is undone, it's revoked retroactively. What is the source? The Gemara has given other sources. One of the potential sources was lo yachal dvarei. He can't violate his statement. In other words, if you make a neder, you can't violate. But a rabbi could forgive it for you and allow you to violate the statement. That was one of the sources. Another version is, there is another source to indicate to us where the source of revoking a neder is. Shenemar, as the pasuk says, ish kiyafli, kiyafli shtei pa'amim. It says the word kiyafli is used twice with regard to nedarim. Once with regard to nedarim, once with regard to nazirus. One is to tell me echad hafla le'isser, but echad hafla leheter. One of them tells me a flaw, a statement to create prohibition, to prohibit to prohibit an item with a neder, or to become a nazir. And the other type of a flaw is the rabbi invoking a heter, a permission to revoke the neder. And that is what Kiyafli is telling me. Okay. That concludes the Gemara. Top of Samach Beis Amud Beis, 62b. Okay, so yesterday we spoke about the fact that if a slave becomes a Nazir, the master can force him to eat. He can force him to eat grapes, to drink wine, become tamei, etc. He can force him to violate his Nazirus. Whereas as a husband whose wife accepted a Nazirus, the husband has a right to be mefer, to nullify it. But if he didn't nullify it, he has to live with it. He cannot force his wife to violate the Nazirus. Okay, so in that way, we say that that his wife's Nazirus is more severe. However, in another angle, a slave's Nazirus in a certain sense is more severe. Why is that? So he can nullify his wife's Nazirus. If his wife becomes a Nazir and nullifies it, it's over. There's nothing left of it. However, with regard to a slave, if a slave becomes a Nazir, he is a Nazir. The master cannot revoke the Nazirus or nullify it. He could, however, force him to actually violate the Nazirus. Hefer le'ishtay, hefer elamis. If he nullifies his wife's Nazirus, it's permanently nullified. If she gets divorced, if he dies, it doesn't make a difference. She's not a Nazir unless she becomes a Nazir again. However, hefer la'abda, if he nullifies his slave's Nazirus, and then yotzal cheres, and then he leaves, he becomes a free man. Umashim Nazirusa, he needs to complete his Nazirus. So the Nazirus sort of is still hanging over him. He just can't. The master isn't forced to live with it until while the slave is indentured to him. If the slave becomes a free man, on the other hand, then he has to complete his Nazirus and he's live with the laws of Nazirus. Okay, says the Gemara. Tana Rabbanon, Lama Rabbi Kaifel Nazirusai. One second. Tana Rabbanon, Lama Rabbi Kaifel Nazirusai. Why is it that a master can force his slave to violate Nazirus? Avaloi l'nedarim u'le'erev. Okay, so we'll see here. At this, there's going to be two versions of the Gemara. I'll just outline the Gemara first. Initially, the Gemara thinks that a slave makes a neder, he has to keep it. So he makes a neder not to sit in a chair. Master's got to give him a couch, right? However, if he makes a neder to become a Nazir, the master can force him to eat grapes. Work in the grape fields. That's the beginning of the Gemara. The Gemara at the last segment, we'll see the Gemara flips on it. The Gemara actually says that with regard to Nedarim, there is zero. The slave cannot make a neder. With regard to Nazir, he could, but the master can override it. So it's actually that Nazir sort of is more significant than Nedarim. That's what in a moment. Okay, but in the beginning of the Gemara presumes that Nedarim is more severe than Nazirus. The master needs to accommodate a neder, but not Nazirus. The Gemara says, Nazir. What's the difference? By Nazir, it says, Rahman, unless or Isser al Nafshay. He prohibits, he makes a prohibition on his nefesh. You have to be able to own yourself to become a Nazir. A slave doesn't own himself, and therefore he cannot become a Nazir. With regard to Nedarim, it should be the same rule that a slave should not be able to create a neder and force his master to live with that neder. Okay, 1 second. Okay, so the Gemara suggests that Nedarim is easier to deal with than Nazirus. Amar of Sheshes. So Sheshes says, what are we talking about? Where there's a cluster of grapes on a table in front of him. Gabi Nedarim, with regard to neder, the chimitzer b'hayla mitzvah b'achroni, if he bans himself from this cluster of grapes, he can get a different cluster of grapes. So lo matzi kafilei, the master can't force him to violate Nedarim. However, Gabi Naziris the chimitzer b'hay itzer b'kulu, when he becomes prohibited in this grape, he becomes prohibited in all grapes. So then matzi kafilei, the master can force him to eat the grape anyway. Gemara says that this is a very poor distinction. That sort of a neder is easier to accommodate because it could very well be a possibility where there's one cluster of grapes on the table and the neder is not easy to accommodate. For example, is it not possible? The guy hasn't eaten anything, and this is the only food around, this cluster of grapes. The will become weak, and the master is not obligated to suffer a weaker slave because the guy doesn't want to eat this grape. Okay, so Gemara says, Rava says we're talking about Chartzen, remember, is the peels. So he has a pile of grape peels, very appetizing foods. Presumably, even if the Eved is hungry, nobody would force him to eat grape peels. So since with regard to neder, only these peels he becomes prohibited to, we can't force him. The Gabi Nazir, the Itzer, Nami Bachroni becomes prohibited in all grapes. Matzi kafile, he can force him to consume the grapes anyway. So Gemara says, hold on a second. The Gabi Nadar Mili Askina, the Lek Allah Chartzen. There could be a situation with regard to Nadarim. The only thing for him to eat is a pile of grape peels. The and if he doesn't eat it, he'll become weak. And again, presumably the master isn't required to suffer on behalf of the slave's neder. So why is it that he has to accommodate neder but doesn't have to accommodate nazirus? So now Abayas switches the scenario, switches the presumption. Why is it that he has to force him to violate nazirus but doesn't have to force him to violate nadarim? Or to violate a shvur. My time when somebody makes a neder or a shvur, he does a shvur or he makes a shvur to do good or not to do something. It's just like he has the option of fulfilling the positive thing, right? And I could go ahead and make everybody coffees, or I could not. They both have to be voluntary, things that you're not obligated to do. However, a slave is obligated to serve his master, and therefore he's not allowed to make a neder at all. The master doesn't even have to force him to nullify it, to go against what he did. He can't do bad to somebody else that he doesn't have a right to do. A neder is a commitment that sort of runs against the commitment he has to his master. And therefore the master, not only does the master not have to accommodate it, the neder is not valid. Whereas by nazirus, he is able to make a nazirus. However, the master can force him to violate the nazirus.
Okay. So when we're talking about a slave here, it's an Ivrit slave or just a slave? Any slave?
No, so typically we're talking about an Eved Kanani. So an Eved Kanani is he's technically Jewish, but he has the same status of he's a Jewish male, but he doesn't put on tefillin, right? Because he has the same obligation as a woman has. So he doesn't have to hear Shofar Rosh Hashanah, etc. The classic example of how to make a non-Jewish slave is somebody who's captured in battle. Mm-hmm. So you go to battle against a foreign country, and they're all non-Jews, and you capture men, and you have the option of either killing them or enslaving them. And so there's a process. They have to convert, but again, the conversion doesn't make them into a full-fledged Jew; it makes them into a slave Jew. And they're sort of different than regular Jewish males. They have to keep the commandments, but they don't have the positive commandments. They have the same positive commandments that a woman has. Okay. We'll stop here. See you tomorrow. Okay. Have a great week. God willing, in a week from today, we will be having a siyum.
Oh.
I'll send out try to figure out next week Sunday. I think I wrote 12:30, but it might be a little bit later. I have to start working on the final details. God willing, I'll send it out soon, and we'll figure it out. And if anyone can get back to me, just tell me how many are running along. Yeah.